Hello, this is Jenna from McGuire. Lately, watercolor has been very popular in the stamping and card making world, and I wanted to share another video showing a technique that you can do with watercolor. Now, I will admit I'm not super comfortable with watercolor, but I found some tips lately that I think make it really easy and allow the water to do all the work for us. And I did this with a white outline and some soft watercolor. Now, before I jump into the techniques, I did want to show you that this card was very heavily inspired by my friend Tasneem. She sent this card to me in the mail, and I just thought it was absolutely stunning, and I asked her if I could use it for inspiration for my card, and thankfully she said yes. And I will put a link here and in my YouTube description and in my blog to her blog and YouTube channel. She is fantastically talented. Now, Tasneem is one of the owners of Altenew. It's a new stamp company, and they have great designs. And I'm actually going to use some of their stamps today. This is one of their stamp sets. It's a newer one. And I just thought the details in the stamp set were just beautiful. So, oh, that's my son saying hi in the camera there. Sorry about that. Anyways, I've got some watercolor paper here from Tim Holtz. That's by far my favorite of all the watercolor paper, and it comes cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Now, I am going to stamp on here with Versamark ink, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp the big images kind of coming off the top and the bottom of my card. Now, when I do this, I wanted to add a white outline to my image, but I wanted it to be a little more interesting than just a plain white embossing powder. So I'm actually going to use a new powder that I found that's a silver pearl. It's like a white pearl embossing powder. So it ends up giving you a gorgeous pearl look, and it's so much more interesting than plain white. So there are a lot of great embossing powders out right now, and they're very inexpensive, so I encourage you to check them out. It's kind of hard to see the pearl look here in the camera, but you can kind of see it when I tilt it up here. But it is just beautiful in real life, and when we stamp the back of the note card, you'll be able to see the pearl color real nicely. Now, I did decide to go in and add a few little individual leaves kind of scattered away from the large flowers. It's kind of hard to see everything here, but when I zoom in, you'll be able to see the outline of the white embossed image that has that pearly look to it. Now, I'll tilt this in the light so you can see the white embossing against the white background. It's really beautiful in real life. Now, I wanted to add watercolor to this, and I have two favorite types of watercolor. One is the Peerless watercolor. I'll put a link here to a video showing that. And this is my other new favorite form of watercolor. I just think this is so high quality. You can pop the colors out. It's got the soft pool colors. It's got a pearlescent white and a gold and a bronze. They're just beautiful. I do like that I can pop the colors out because I can kind of move this out of my way and just take to the table with me what colors I plan to use on my card. So I'm going to go ahead and pick out 3 shades of blue. I actually only end up using the pool and the dark blue. Then a couple shades of green and the pearlescent and the gold. And I'll show you along the way how you can mix these together to get really fun results. Now, this is a super high quality watercolor, so it is a little more expensive than others, but I've found that it really gives the best results. But you could do this technique with whatever watercolor you have, even your kid's Crayola. Now, I am taping my project to a cutting board. This allows me to kind of move it around and keep it nice and flat while I'm working on it. Just makes it so much easier to work. You could tape it to anything firm so you can move it around while you're working. So let's go ahead and start adding some color. The way I do this is I first wet the area where I want to color. I'm picking out one petal I want to start with. I added some water to fill in the petal with just some water, and now I'm dropping in some of the pool color in the area where I want the color to be the darkest, so deep inside that petal. Then I just go dip my brush in more water and kind of blend that color out to the tip, and that allows the water to do all the work for me, bringing it out to the tip of the petal. Now I'm going to go in and pick a little bit of the dark blue up with the tip of my brush and drop that into the petal also in the deepest part of it. And then the water will just allow that all to blend. Now, I kind of fuss around with it a little bit, but I'm telling you, if you don't fuss around with it, it actually gives better results. So it's really best to let the water do the work for you. Now, I'm not doing the pearlescent here. I hadn't yet decided I wanted to add that, but in a moment I'll show you how you can add it. Now I'm going to speed this up so you can see a few more petals. I first covered it with water. Now I'm dropping in some of the pool color in some of the darker areas, and look at it, just moves on its own thanks to the water that we put down on the paper in the first place. And then I will pick up some dark blue and drop that into the heavier parts, and you'll get a feel for how this color comes out. It's very creamy, so you just need a little bit on your brush to add a lot of color. I'm using a superfine brush. This is one that my friend Dawn from W+9 recommended. It's a great brush, and I'll provide a link to that. But you could do this with any brush that you have. I think these fine tip brushes are fantastic for tiny images like this. And it makes it really easy to paint in first with the water and then just drop tiny bits of color onto the water that you've added. Now look at that. You can see the water just pull the color out. So I drop in the color, then I add a little more water and it starts to blend on its own, and then I add the darker in, and look at it, just moves on its own. So I work in different areas. Even though this is embossed and it keeps the watercolor in lines, which really helps me out a lot to have that heat embossed image where it's raised. I do work on petals that aren't touching each other, so I don't have to worry about them accidentally blending into each other. So that's why you saw me do 4 different petals all by themselves, and now I'm switching to the other flower. I probably spend about a half hour watercoloring this, but I tell you, it's therapeutic. I think coloring just takes me back to when I was a kid and you could just sit and color for hours. Now I did decide to go back in and add some of this pearlescent color, the white that's included in the set, and I just put some into the water at the light end of the petals, and you can see it just works its way in, and it gives a pearly shine when you tilt it in the light. It's just beautiful, and it also helps to give a highlight to the parts of the petal that would be in the light. Now here is a little bit of green. I'm doing the same thing. I'm adding water. Then I'm adding some green into the areas where the color probably would be the darkest. Then I'm going to add a little more water, and now I'm going in with a darker green and just adding little drops of it. I did put a little pearlescent on the leaves. I'm going to add the pearlescent on everything from here on out. Later on in the video, I will go back and add some gold to the leaves. So here, let me do one more leaf for you. I just covered it in water. Now, if you get out of lines like I did right there, no worries. Just take a baby wipe and it'll just kind of suck up the color to remove it. Or you could use a clean wet brush to pull it away, which you'll see me do in a moment, because for some reason I kept going out of the line here. So there I added the darker color. I'm going to add a little pearlescent, which helps with the highlighting, and it just blends on its own. And here I'm coming in with a clean wet brush to kind of erase or remove any color that was outside of the lines. Now I will say this is something that if you just practice once and kind of get a feel for how your watercolor works with the paper that you're using and the brush that you're using, it all starts to move quicker as you go. You start to kind of pick up speed as you get more comfortable with them. So you can see I'm just getting much faster and just letting the water do the work for me. And by adding that pearlescent, it automatically adds the highlights that the natural light would add. And I'm not great with highlights, so anything that can help me is great. Now I let this dry, and if you want to kind of smooth out any of the areas that didn't blend well, you can go with a wet brush, or if you want to add some darkness to some areas that were too light, you can go and add more color on top. So it's up to you whether or not you want that kind of free-flowing kind of watercolor look, or if you want to smooth it out more on your own. I like to go in and add a little bit of darkness in the areas that I felt should be a little bit darker, but it's really up to you. You can see here I'm going and adding some shading to the center. But it's, the amount of time that you want to spend on this is totally your preference. You could leave it as it was in the beginning and it would be beautiful as is. Okay, so now I have let this dry. I'm going to go ahead and peel away my painter's tape very carefully. If you don't have painter's tape, by the way, you could use washi tape. Now I wanted to show you how I did the pearlized stripes on the back of the note card here. This is a background stamp from My Favorite Things. I love these diagonal stripe backgrounds. Now I'm going to go ahead and stamp this on the edge of a note card. This is Sea Glass note card from Simon Says Stamp. I'm just going to stamp this right along the edge. I don't care to cover the whole background because only a little bit will show. I'm just stamping it with the Versamark ink, which you'll barely see when I peel this off. But I'm going to go ahead and add on some of that pearlescent embossing powder. Now when you put the pearlescent embossing powder on the colored cardstock, it kind of picks up that color and it gives just these beautiful pearly stripes that is just gorgeous. So this is great for creating kind of a interesting tone-on-tone background. You can see how it catches in the light there. It's just beautiful. So I'm using some foam tape on the back of our watercolored piece. I'm going to go ahead and add this to the card just so that you can see some of the stripes peeking out the side. And I did have to trim my watercolor piece a little bit. Now it's time to add the finishing touches to the card. For the sentiment, I wanted something soft that wasn't too dark, so I decided on this piece from Color Cast Designs. I'll put a link in my YouTube description and over on my blog. It's a sheer acrylic piece that I just think is beautiful. I'm using my favorite strong adhesive. This is multi-medium from Ranger, and it's a matte finish. And I just add it onto my card, and that will stay put. I end up moving this, which I'll show you in a moment. Now I did decide at this point that I wanted to add the gold that was in that same watercolor set that I used before. But my watercolor had all dried. That's okay. All you do is just take some water, pick up the gold color, put it right onto the green, and then use some water to kind of blend it out, to blend it in with the green that's already there. Now this little bit of gold really makes a big difference in real life. Between this and the pearlescent white that we added before, it does add a lot of shine that I haven't been able to get from any other watercolors that I've tried. Now I will say at this point, you really can't see the gold when I tilt it here, but let me show you the scrap paper where I practiced it. You could see, look how intense that gold is in the gold splatters. It's just beautiful in real life. It's just hard to capture on the video. Now this is the point where I decided I wanted to move my greeting. It was still a little wet, so I could still move it. And the nice thing is all I have to do is take an eraser to erase any of that adhesive that it was left behind. This was still wet, so I could still move it. Now I'm going to put a little more adhesive on it and move it down here to the bottom. I just felt that looked a little bit better, and that's one of the great things about using a liquid adhesive, if you can move it while it's still a little wet. So there you have the finished card. You can see there's lots of pearl look with the embossing powder and the pearlized watercolor, and then the touches of gold that I added to the green. You can kind of see it here when I put it up close to the camera. So I hope these tips for doing watercolor by just letting the water do the work for you are helpful. Again, you can do this with any watercolors that you may have. Now, if you're interested in any of the products that I use, I link them all in my YouTube description to multiple sources, or you can go over to my blog. If you click here, it'll take you right to the blog post where there's much more information. And as always, if you found this video helpful, please let YouTube know by giving it a thumbs up. Thanks so much for watching.